Yeah, so my name's Jared Day. I had a black lab named Remi that was born in 2009 and recently passed away in 2022 in May of this year. So I grew up in Western North Carolina with a dad and a grandfather that had a passion for the outdoors. And so as we grew up, my dad did some upland training of English setters. And we had the opportunity to see my dad in a setting where he was able to bond with these animals. There weren't a lot of folks in Western North Carolina that had gotten into waterfowl hunting. When I came down to state, I met a lot of friends and college buddies that did a lot of waterfowl hunting, and I quickly became hooked. And what really caught my interest and piqued my interest about waterfowl hunting was the dog, the actual man and dog relationship. As years kind of progressed and I got into my senior year of college, I had reached out to my parents and said, for a graduation present, as unorthodox as it may be, I'd really like to have a duck dog as a graduation present that was my own, one that I could spend time with, one that I could train, one that I could really create that bond I saw my dad create with his bird dogs. A friend of mine, Aaron, and I had decided that we were going to get a Labrador Retriever together. We found a litter that was actually going to be had in January of 2009. And so I had told him the only couple things that from a criteria standpoint that I'd like to have is a female black lab, and then I also would like to have a runt of the litter if possible. And so Remi was the runt of the litter, and one of the reasons I chose the runt was because my dad told me years ago that if you've got a runt that's very healthy of a litter, they have that extra drive. They've got that extra motivation to succeed. And so the first time that I had an opportunity to meet Remi, I was already obviously standing in the driveway waiting for him to pull up. And inside a small cardboard box in the front seat of his Ford Ranger, I can remember just leaning over and looking, and there sat Remi, about half the size of the other black lab female Pearl that they then had the chance to grow up together. So there was a lot of anticipation and build up to that day, and that was one that I'll really remember. So after college, had the opportunity to take a job in Texas working on a potato farm as a chemical applications manager, and I had to ship her off through the airline a few days before I could arrive, and the ground crew for the airlines were actually had Remi out of her kennel and playing with her on the tarmac, which was pretty cool because anybody that Remi ended up coming across, she was very infectious. She loved people. I had the opportunity with that job to spend a lot of time by myself. I was out scouting crop. I was spending a lot of time on our application rig, and I would catch myself in the sprayer cab just telling Remi things about life, or just talking to her, telling stories, and and she listened. So after about a year in Texas, I had an opportunity to move back home and work for John Deere. And so Remi and I had packed up and we started moving back to North Carolina. And there was a time in her life that really put me at a point where I was hoping everything was okay, but I wasn't for sure. I'd never been across. But around a year old, she started developing seizures. And these seizures would happen while she was in training, while she was at rest. Some panting would start, and then you would notice a little bit of a roll of the eye, and then you would notice kind of some convulsions. Her legs would go fairly stiff, and at that point, you had 45 seconds of just kind of really rough emotions. So we really couldn't put our finger on what was causing them or why, and they became more frequent. And I thought, hey, At this young age, one of the things that we can control is having her spayed and take some of that stress off of her body. So we took that approach. The seizures did somewhat slow down, but we still saw them every couple months. And at that point, we ended up going back to the vet. She went on some medication for seizures, and that did help. It helped, but the doctors told us that this was kind of the way she was going to have to live for a while. But what I really noticed about Remi is when she came out of them, she was the same dog. And that created some ease, but also knowing that the vet said, hey, there's no pain when they're having a seizure. They don't feel anything. And so that really helped me get through that. And fast forward a few years, the time between when she had the seizures just got greater and greater and greater. And a few years before she passed, we actually took her off all the medication because she had had the seizure in over a year. So it was kind of unique to see her grow out of that, but it was a scare. Remi quickly took on to commands. That was very, very easy for her. It got to the point where I can only take Remi to where I remember my dad taking his dogs, but there's a fine line between an upland dog and a waterfowl dog. And at that time, I had a friend of mine that had mentioned to me a book called Water Dog by Richard Walters. And one of the unique things that I remember in that book was talking about gaining the trust of the dog, putting on waders and actually getting in the water, and her seeing that I'm comfortable and she trusted that I was okay and I was safe. And a few moments after she was in, it wasn't the prettiest swimming you've ever seen, but after she got the hang of it, it was really unique to see her, how quick she started to pick things up. Remi's first retrieve was a memory that has been instilled in me for a long time. There was some excitement. I'm not sure who was more excited, Remi or myself, but one of the things that I always wanted Remi to see and experience was another waterfowl dog. We had found an old beaver swamp north of Raleigh that we had permission to hunt. It was a beautiful, cool, crisp morning. The sun rose, and there was a few woodies that had come by, and we'd shot a couple of woodies. And as Remi was leashed next to me, Dixie started to go to work. And you could tell Remi was just watching this dog. She was taking in the work that was being done by another duck dog. And so it wasn't long after that, probably an hour and a half, we're sitting there enjoying ourselves, and next thing you know, we hear the honks of the Canadian goose, and everybody gets excited, and we begin to hunker down. And geese began to drop left and right, and I can remember about 7 or 8 geese that had hit the water. I looked over at Kevin and I said, Kevin, that's a lot of geese for her to pick up. I was like, let's see what Remi can do. He's like, fine by me. And so I looked over at Remi and I said, girl, it's your time. You ready? And she looked up at me with these big floppy ears and those sweet brown eyes. And she, just with anticipation, she said, yeah, let's go. Let's do this. So I'd unleashed her. I marked her on one of the birds that was somewhat closer to us. And as I sent her off on the mark, she goes right by this bird. And I'm kind of thinking, what's going on? And I noticed Remi was going after this wounded geese. We were sitting there thinking, do we bring her back, or do we just see what happens? And we kind of just watched her as she starts coming back, almost 2 years old, her head's above the water, and that goose is just slapping her wings. She's pecking at her. Remi didn't miss a beat. It was one of the coolest things to watch because she was just beeline, a direct line back to me. She got to land, she dropped the goose at my feet, and she sat down. And it was like, how was that, Dad? You know, a really, really cool experience to see that first retrieve. 1, a goose, but for 2, it was that extra drive that I still think Remi had in her to do just a little bit more than the norm. So as Remi progressed in her training, and we fast forward a few years, Aaron and I still had the opportunity to train Remi and Pearl together, and they got into their 4, 5, 6 year old range. And Aaron and I had talked for a while about taking a larger waterfowling trip, and one of the places that we had always wanted to go was North Dakota, and they both did very, very well. That was something that Remi gained a lot of trust Let me take you out of state. Let me train you a different way. Let me trust you in another place. And I think that just strengthened the bond Remi and I had and we had created. Remi's birthday was in January. So January of 2022, she had just turned 13. She was at the point where we'd already hung the vest up. Her hunting career had been completed and way above satisfactory. And at that time, Remi's health began to deteriorate some. And I knew that there were some decisions that were going to have to be made. I tried to push it aside. My mom and my wife were trying to get me to the point where, hey, this is going to happen. She's not going to be here forever. Selfishly, I wanted her to be there, but I knew that I was going to have to, at some point, say goodbye. A few months passed, and she began to get a little bit slower. She needed assistance to get up and down steps. She began to sleep a lot. And in the last few days, it scared us because she went a few days without any food. It was at that point where we had called the vet and we had started to make some plans for early that next week. Well, Sunday after church, I was playing golf with some church friends and I get a call from Katie that Remi's not doing well at all. She's conscious, but she's not able to really move. We make the decision to take her to a specialty veterinary clinic in Raleigh. And we start looking at some scans. We even sent some scans off to another veterinarian that was in Hawaii at the time that specialized in these type of scans. The scans didn't really come back with anything that pointed to why. They said, hey, let's let her stay here tonight and monitor. We're going to give her some medication. Katie and I, we prayed about it, and we didn't think that it was the right call for us to leave her, even though that was great, but we didn't want to leave her in that environment, not knowing if that was going to be her last night or not. So we take her home that night, but of course I couldn't sleep. And so I had laid down beside Remi, but Remi never slept that night either. She stayed up with me, almost like she knew. And there was a time through the middle of the night that I took Remi outside to try to get her to use the restroom. And had to carry her down the steps and brought her back in and laid her back down on her bed. And another couple hours passed. And this was probably 5:30 that morning. And Katie had woken up to check on things, and her and Remi and I, and also our other golden retriever Whaler that was very, very close to Remi. At that point, we had both decided to take Remi out and let's take her to a spot on our barn porch where she just loved to lay. She loved to be comfortable. She loved to look out. It was kind of her place. And so we took Remi out there and we just laid there with her. And I remember laying there on the barn porch, and there was this one instance when I looked into her eyes, and all I could see was just how tired she was. She was tired of the pain. She was tired of battling. But she knew in her heart that it was time for her to go. And I knew at that point that it was time for me to let her go. And so I turned to Katie, who was right there beside me, and I told Katie, I said, it's time. It's time to make this decision. And the next couple moments were just something that I will never forget. Remi had laid there that morning, almost to a degree so close to lifeless. The sun came up that morning, and I had a chance to see her head raised. And she watched that sun come up. And we knew that was probably her last And so we called a vet to come into our home, and I had a chance to look into Remi's eyes one last time and share that bond and share that love and share that last feeling of hunter and dog. We laid her to rest and ended up choosing to have her cremated so that I could spread some of her ashes in some places that she loved. The pond in front of the blind, the coast where she had hunted so many times, the mountains where she grew up and loved to roam, and she's with us. She's with us to this day, and um, she's irreplaceable. As months pass, you kind of look back on all these moments. You look back on the memories that were made, the relationships that were created, the love that was shared, and just the ability for Remi to touch so many other than myself. And we have one first dog, especially a working dog. A working dog shares the time, they share the space, they share the enjoyment, they share the challenges that you share. And a working dog is working alongside you, right? And so that bond that's created between man and dog, and specifically working dog, is one that if I look back as a young boy and I watch my dad and I watched him work those dogs so hard, in turn those dogs worked so hard for him, that was what Remi did. That was what Remi relayed back to me, was her appreciation of, thanks for everything you did, Dad. Thanks for everything you did, Mom. But even more special about Remi was she had that willingness to share my heart. And only gone, but not forgotten. So one last thank you I'd like to give on behalf of Remi and I is I'd like to thank Kent, Chad, all the staff with East Coast Waterfowl. This opportunity is one that I cherish and I greatly appreciate. So East Coast Waterfowl, thank you for allowing me to tell Remi's story, but also have this to be able to look back upon years down the road and share with my family. So East Coast Waterfowl, thank you.